Record. And there we go. Hey, good evening, guys. Ken at Tortoise Capital. This is the Creativity 202 check-in for October 17th, 2023. We'll do a quick, 10 or 15 second check-in, how you're doing, where you're at. If you can let me know what lesson you're working on, in case we need to call that lesson up, that'll let me get prepped. And we'll get started with your permission with Jeff. How's it going, sir?
Great. I'm back home again. I was home for a few days and then had to go back to Idaho and get our last remaining piece of equipment. So as of last night, when I landed, we've got all of our stuff and all of our people back home safe and sound. So life is good.
Well, very good. Good to hear. And Jeremy, what's going on?
Yeah, hey everyone. So based in Denver, Colorado. I'm in week 2 of this course. Currently trading currency pairs and had a good week of trading last week. Was the first week where I prepared every day, was ready to trade every day, had time booked out either before or after work, and had a good week of activity last week.
Very good. Nothing wrong with that. And Joe, how are we doing?
Doing well. Kind of a long day for me today. Spent 8 hours on the 2 videos describing the weekly and the daily report, jumping back and forth from the dialogue to the actual current report, and tremendously positive input. And I could see running through that exercise maybe once a month until I really feel like I have it solid. Thank you for having a deep voice, because I do like to play it faster. And one time I was listening to an instructor with a high voice, and playing him fast sounded like I was listening to a chipmunk. So
yeah, it gets to be that way. Yeah, I just admire you guys for your patience and persistence to listen to the sound of my voice, because when I listen to it, I just can't stand it at all. It just drives me nuts.
Well, it's
I
not
think
bad.
everybody has that feeling, I guess, but it just you can't help it. But
And listening to you 1 3/4 and then doubling back and listening to you in real time, you sound a little slow, actually, to be honest with you. But
I like to think of it as deliberate, like.
but that was good, and getting some other projects done. So feeling like I'm moving in the right direction here.
Well, it's very good. I really enjoyed that little essay that you sent me. There's a lot of important and timely material in that. I have been working with Angus Fletcher from Ohio State. His latest book is Story Thinking, and what you were talking about in that essay has an awful lot to do with in what I view as story thinking, as a style of thinking: rapid, expansive, non-binding, concerned with potential and some possible world where this could be true. So it's a very, not only just suspending disbelief for a moment, but actively and aggressively stringing together things that don't necessarily go together, and deferring judgment until we've really fully explored the potentiality space, is how I think about it. It's where if there's only a 1% chance that it could be true, then wow, we've really accomplished something, as opposed to the other end of the spectrum in the rational scientific method, and even in the lawyerly argumentative method, where we're identifying one fact at a time, proving that is true, and then slowly building the construction of an argument that is bulletproof. Well, those two represent extreme conditions in cognitive skills or cognitive approaches. And the rational thing is what builds bridges that stand for generations. But the speculative, the poetic, the artistic, the irrational almost, is the creative spark personified. It turns what was once just a feeling or a hint or a trigger into something that can stand on its own as an idea or a concept that can be tested or just preserved and remembered for a time when it comes around. That's where all the wacky ideas come from. It's what you do in acts of desperation that comes up with the crazy idea that just might work. So you're saying there's a chance, that whole mentality. Fletcher's whole book is a walk through the philosophy of Western thought, showing how that has been disrespected since the time of Aristotle, and some maybe mistranslations of the rhetoric that he wrote, where that was treated as if that was just a secondary art dealing with simple persuasion and manipulation, as opposed to being a full-up, co-equal way of thinking in the same way that Aristotle's rationality and his scientific outlook has been treated. So he's trying to, bring it back into the world of the respectable. And so I think that's, the outlet for intuition, that intuition starts with a feeling based on some trigger that happened in the depths. And it slowly builds until we become vaguely aware of it, and then it becomes something that we can start seeing images of, or we get a shock of inspiration when we sense that there is something there, and now we got to develop it and be able to articulate it and communicate it to somebody else, meaning that we've got to communicate it to ourselves in a way that makes sense to our gatekeeper, which is that sort of little rational modulator who watches what we're about to say in the public space to prevent a disaster from happening. The sociological moderator. We've inherited a brain and a sociology that says we really value the opinions of others, and we want to be thought well of, and we don't want to be crazy, and we want to abide by norms. And so our language has this little governor on it that tests this thing in our head to see what it sounds like before we say it. When we just blurt things out without saying it, that's the governor was asleep at the wheel, the little sensor in there. And in certain moments, you maybe raise the level of being very careful about what it is that you speak. Like if you're being interrogated by the police or you're given sworn testimony, you raise your level of attention to detail to what you're about to release into the world, knowing that once it's out there, you can't get it back. So, to me, the power of these story circles, the true story, when you surrender to it, wants to be heard, and you are the vessel carrying it into the public space. And when you surrender, and when you feel free enough to trust that, because you're not going to be judged by the other people in the circle, then amazing phraseology comes out of you. You start hearing the story for the first time after you've said it, as opposed to it being a measured script that it's improv. Where does that stuff come from? And so your discussion of the intuition and its relationship to the trader's mind now is a really powerful point of inquiry, because most of the guidance that I'm given, and that you hear me talking about, what was the source of the idea, what was the impulse to act, and placing a wedge between the impulse to act and the decision to act. because so many times that'll just get you murdered in the markets because it's not designed to take care of you. It's designed to, kill people and eat, for meat eaters to devour you. So the challenge for the trader is to come up with some kind of rules of behavior that we can abide by, that have withstood some kind of test of time, and at the same time to respect the impulse of our pattern matching brain, that little inspiration that might actually be connecting things for the first time, that gives us an insight and perhaps leads to an edge if it was never done before, or if it's really different than what the herd would do. There's a good chance that there's something in there that could be beneficial. So how do I moderate that and respect that? I don't want to control it or eliminate it. First of all, I can't control it because it's feelings and emotions based. And once I've had the impulse, it's already occurred. Once I've noticed it, it's already coursing through my veins and it's affecting my behavior. And it's building up a charge, an emotional charge that wants to act. And if I don't act this time and I don't process that charge, then it's simply going to accumulate until I get enough pinpricks that I just end up reacting all out of proportion. And so where did that behavior come from? So the trader is especially concerned with where impulses come from or where the intuitions come from. And I see a lot of language in the trading community that says how to eliminate emotions from your trading, how to control it, how to discipline it, how to restrict it. Whereas I just say embrace it and let it be exactly what it is, and just note it and study it when it's time to study the insight in a safe manner. And just don't let the child or the monkey mind drive the car that's carrying your family down the highway to the land of milk and honey. There's a time and a place at the rest halt to do that kind of analysis and to encourage the intuition to occur. There's a secondary problem in there, and that has to do with how do you manage your own expertise through time, that if you started off with rules and then rules of thumb and they were successful for you, and as a result of your success, you've now gathered experience and a lot of your unconscious mind is putting together pieces and parts and building expertise at the unconscious level. And now suddenly it wants you to do something and you say, well, I never do that because I always used to never do that. Is that impulse coming from an informed place, or was it simply something you had a hot pepper for breakfast and now that sparked a response? How do I detect the difference between an intuition that has value and an intuition that's just a random noise, a response to a random noise generator, a random response to random noise? And that it was from that frame of mind, that frame of reference, that the whole idea of trader quality number came about, which was, if I have a trading system and I can code it so that a robot can trade it error-free, and I give it a series of trades, I should be able to trust that to say that's exactly what that system is designed to get. And then if I trade those trades myself with the possibility of some discretionary judgment in there, I can now set those two sets of results side by side and see what is the net effect of my trader's judgment when I override the rules. Is that a positive or a negative expectancy from the trader quality number? And you should know what that number is. And if it is positive expectancy, then you want to do that. And if it's negative expectancy, you don't want to do that. And then if it's positive expectancy, you want to start analyzing the intuitions and grouping and categorizing and taking all the fun out of it and saying, what are the circumstances that triggered the intuition? Is there a pattern there? What were the behaviors that I took to override the rules? Are they of a certain kind? Is there an edge to be found in some reliable set of those intuitions? And can I then code that after I've tested some parameters and then turned what was once an intuition that I was hoping that the environment would trigger me and that I would react in the right way? Can I turn that into something like a update to my rules or a contingency plan or a completely different system? All of my good ideas that are, unique to me, anything that I've been the actual creator of, comes from exactly that kind of process. The PSAR exit, and which then became the PSAR flip and everything downstream from that, simply came about from trying to articulate why I was moving my stops the way I was moving my stops. Given the price action, why did you move your stop here rather than there? What was the rule that you had? And I said, well, in many cases, it was just a trade-off between fear and greed, and my rational mind trying to find some trade-off. Said, I feel like I've got money in hand here. I know that I've got money in hand, and I know that it's better than average. I don't want to lose it, but I also want to let this thing continue to breathe and go. How much noise can I allow it to have? And at what point do I draw the line that it's my money? Well, going back over hundreds and hundreds of those trades where I was, in retrospect, very satisfied with the way I found the balance, the trade-off between those two competing pressures, I started saying, well, that actually starts looking like a PSAR of some type. So let me try to just start monkeying around with the parameters on the PSAR to approximate the adjustment of stops that I had made on my chart by hand. And then it was out, it was too soon or too late. It was a lot of variability. And then once I had a moment of insight where it was like, oh yeah, I'm treating the RL10 as price. Why don't I just see what that does to the PSAR, and using the RL10 value, which discounts the fat tails of a price bar, and it goes just with whatever the perfectly predictable price should be for that bar. In fact, what the RL10 price in a bar set, it only counts that bar's price closing as 1/10 of the data that creates what was the perfect price. So the RL10 point may not even be in the bar if the bar was that far out. The perfect price predicted by the RL10 may be outside of that bar altogether. So what you end up getting when you use the RL10 as the price for PSAR calculations is you get a much more orderly and smooth progression. And as you start fine-tuning that, because the variation is smaller, you can engineer that much closer to the kind of smooth and orderly trailing stop that you want. And that's where I ended up with 0.2 and 0.12 as being the best trade-off between give it room to run, but preserve after a parabolic move. And that really comes from story thinking and a hint, a trigger, a feeling, a lot of different ways to try to make sense of it and solve it with rapid prototyping of ideas in my head, and then coming up with well, let's try the PSAR, let's refine that, and then quickly converge on a solution, and then study a good enough solution until it becomes a really good solution, till it becomes ready for prime time. That whole process is that pathway from where you're having fun with the intuition to the point where it's boring and just part of a rule set, and it's simply one footnote in a system description that we're going to use a PSAR geared to the RL10 with these parameters because of reasons. There's no fun left in that at all, you know. So what I found really attractive about that essay that you wrote was that it captured a lot of those feelings that I end up expressing through pictures and arrows in a very nicely organized essay that has gotten a lot of favorable comments from folks that I shared it around with. They all thought that was pretty good stuff. Like Griff and Phil over at the Kata 2 Challenge just said, man, this is going in the archive. That's a golden nugget already. So I say all that simply to say, check it in. Everything's good here in Kansas. And I appreciate the work you uploaded. And some of the work I've been doing this week has been trying to articulate more of the what story thinking means to me. It caused me to record a better form of the story of my life audit theater process, which was how I prepared and then prepared for the open heart surgery and then guiding my recovery through that. That's all part of refining that story from what started off as an intuition about how to approach the surgery and beyond to designing an approach and then following through and documenting it and then capturing it at different waypoints. The more and more I reflect on it, I start putting together the different sketches and then the model and the different stories I've told about it as a way to continually get better. It's like it's wood shopping, you know, or workshopping. Get out there in the barn and play with the garage band or whatever until you really develop those songs that are yours. So keep committing to constructing those artifacts. That is a central feature of true storytelling and story thinking, in my view. That's where cave paintings preceded all of the written language because of the power that it evokes in us. And if you are normally comfortable with the words first, at some point start experimenting with sketches and doodles and crayons and thick pencil on 5x8 cards, which have a very pleasing feel to them as you sketch with them, to explore that side of your artistic nature. And that way we respect the surprise voice that's in our mind. We give it permission to speak. We're just not going to let it drive the car when we're trading. That we got to also, as important as it is to generate story thinking, it's also important to have that wedge between the impulse to act and the action you take in the market with the level of risk that's appropriate. You know, I personally love trading on intuition, one share at a time, because I want to find out right away how it feels, even before I've done any kind of back testing on stuff. If it was good enough to come to my internal attention, I'm ready to trade it if I can make the least argument in favor. I would say I'm willing to try that. If I can see it and frame it, and all the questions are answered of the trade frame, off I go. And I'm just going to trade it at a level of risk that allows me to treat it as the experiment that it is. So that's my aha moment. That's my work in progress this week and my contribution to the team. So here's the tones. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Jeremy.
And Ken, I would like to pause recording if you don't mind.
Joe?
Before I start on this week's report, I did want to mention that I realized today that the using the military handbook for the creativity course is absolutely perfect with regards to trading. And part of that gets back to the first words I ever heard you say, Ken Long, in a class at VTI. And you asked somebody, you said, who do you think is on the other side of the trade? Your guardian angel. And I thought that was funny, but it resonated with me and reminded me that, yeah, we're doing battle with somebody who has a completely different point of view than we do on every single trade. So we better approach this in an organized fashion. Having said that, I'm on creativity lesson number 3, where creativity complements compliance. And this lesson pushed a lot of buttons for me. Just that word compliance alone has driven so much change in my life. There's compliance with other people's rules, and then compliance with my own rules. And I've always struggled with compliance on other people's rules, especially if I thought they were wrong or unfair. But there were times when needing to follow those was absolutely the right thing to do. And a good example of that is I used to be in the business in a wirehouse situation with Prudential Securities back in the 90s. And I knew I wanted to be an independent, but you just couldn't do it correctly before the internet came along, because the big firms had access to the markets and they had access to all the research, and the internet kind of blew that out of the water. And we used to call the compliance department the Department of Business Prevention, I think was our nickname for the compliance department, because essentially you were dealing with rule sets designed to control 12,000 people across the country. And if one guy screwed up in Montana, you got a new rule on the East Coast to deal with. So we ended up with layers and layers of compliance that just evolved into bureaucracy that made it very difficult to do business. And when the internet came along, going independent was a natural for me. And I ended up hiring the head of the Florida Department of Banking and Finance Audit Committee as my chief compliance officer, and just said, keep me out of trouble. That's your job. I want to do business and do what I can for people. It's your job to make sure I'm doing it in a compliant way. So I was breaking rules that I didn't even know existed along the way. And, he helped me navigate that. But, this lesson is about complying with other people's rules. Hold Harper's Ferry, and I believe it was a colonel who was in charge, was so driven by fear that he blocked out all creative solutions to accomplish his objectives. And that made me realize the importance of clearly stated objectives, and even stating in those objectives that this objective is more important than sitting still, holding the town, or certain other compliant rules that are out there, perhaps set as guidelines. And for me, that served me well to work around the edges. It's also cost me a lot of money and time in my life. And the important thing about breaking my rules is to look back and make sure that I've looked at that rule breakage from every single angle possible. And, in some of the largest mistakes of my life, one of them was buying a boat. Jeff, you and I were talking about boats earlier. I realized that I needed to get to a point of compassion and gratitude for that mistake before I could truly let it go. And in this case, once I got to that point, I was able to list hundreds of lessons from the mistake of buying this one particular boat. And ultimately, it was a blessing in my life, even though it felt like a ball and chain around my foot for 4 years. So much good came out of that. And I've been driven by urges, intuition, creativity my whole life. My mom was an artist, and she broke a lot of rules in the way she did things. And at the time those rules are being broken, it looks like you're just creating chaos, but sometimes you back away from that and look at it, and it has a bit of a different approach to things. A good example of taking intuition, setting an objective beforehand, and converting that into something useful. Last week, we brought up the Malden conference in this conversation, and I've attended that maybe every one of them, I guess, except for 2 or 3 through the years. And one of my objectives was to listen to these people and their creative ways of thinking, but to always come up with a couple of actionable ideas out of the conference. And through the years, that system, if you will, has evolved a bit to include things like super pinches. And this year at the conference, the CEO of Palantir gave a presentation. And one of the things he said that resonated with me was how they are actually driving states to base funding for vocational schools on the average salary of graduates 2 years out and nothing else. And to me, that resonated so much that it got me digging into this company and this guy's life, and then looking at the stock. And I placed a trade at the end of the conference, not in the middle of the conference, which would have been my normal urge, at the end of the conference. And within 15 minutes, I had a 3R trade out of one system, and out of my options system, I have a trade that's still on now, and it's at 11R as we speak, thinking of closing it. But I don't have a complete rule set for that. So there I've made a decision, and the only thing that's protecting me is my stop rules at this point. So still looking to marry these two things together. And I appreciate what you said earlier, Ken. It's hard to tell if it's intuition or just gas sometimes, and Nassim Taleb's book, Fooled by Randomness, takes that to the nth degree, where sometimes a hedge fund manager with 3 great years of track record has only been rewarded by randomness. And I always want to be open to that as a possibility. And this whole thought process around urges, intuition, objectives has helped me to really be able to back myself off when I have an urge and say, no, let's wait a minute and try to define that. So some objectives that I've clarified as a result of this lesson, and I'll wrap it up with this, are: 1, to find a way to enjoy journaling to the point where it's something I look forward to in my day. And it's kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum on that. And I know I can do it, because I've had plenty of other objectives where I started out with something that was totally opposite of my pathos and now is part of my daily routine. Other objectives: being disciplined in my thoughts and deeds at all times, learn and grow every day, do no harm to others, help those who ask or who are in immediate need, and then make enough money to have total time and money freedom. And I believe this course is one of the keys, one of the best things I've seen in years of self-study. Aho.
Jeff.
I'm going to share my screen if you guys don't mind. Can you guys see this document here? I included a couple of trades. Ken, I haven't talked to you in at least a couple of weeks, but just to let you know that I'm still doing the work. These are on a 30-minute chart. First one was in Microsoft, standard entry. Gave it a couple of days. It just never got going, and then the market started to roll over, and I gave it 1 hour from the top, took that one off at 2R. And then the second trade was the same sort of time frame in Boeing, extremely oversold, turned around, actually took a lower time frame SSC that just blazed higher, so I held it overnight, got a second position in, and then this was the same time on the exit. The whole market started rolling over, and it was at pretty firm resistance there, so took that one off for 12, which felt pretty good. One of my works in progress is to practice adding that second position. So the main reason I came today was to talk about, this is lesson 30, 3 weeks on lesson 30, because I did my check-in on lesson 30 a couple of weeks ago. And Ken, you made one comment. You said, yeah, that sounds good, but don't forget the importance of mindset. So I started working on that. And then last week, I guess I missed you guys. I came in, it was either the wrong time, wrong link or something, but missed you guys checking in last week on Tuesday. It ended up that Kuhn and I did a private Zoom session at one point last week, and I shared this with him, and he came up with, he said, don't forget your identity. You know, everything has to be built on who you are and what you want in life. So thanks to you and Kuhn, I finally feel like lesson 30 is complete for now. So working on it for 3 weeks gave me some clarity, which I value extremely highly. So I think this is like the conclusion of lesson 30. Until it's not, there'll be something else come up in the future. But my word last week was ratchet. And my work in progress now is the trader's mindset. You know, we talk about it, we use that word, but what is it exactly for me? And how does a person actually create it? That's my work in progress. I know I can do hard things because I have a lot of evidence in my life, and I can tell myself, you know, because you accomplish these things, you know, you can accomplish this new thing, even though you haven't done it yet. So that gives me courage and confidence, and I trust myself to do the right thing. But so I reorganized all my work from lesson 30 kind of as a pyramid, with the foundation being the identity and purpose and intention, and then the trader's mindset on top of that, which will include the will to take the trade, the will to put on risk, courage, creativity, trust in yourself to do the right thing at the right time, even though you may not believe in it in that moment. And then I think you have to have hope for the future. You have to have a positive outlook on the future to want to do this in the first place. And then the rest of it is the trade frame, the MMRB, rational position sizing. I think a simple trade plan is best because it needs to be something you can execute perfectly. Entry and exit rules, plan, prepare, execute, and assess. And then once you have all that, I think you have to have a willingness to do the work. And you have to know that it's going to take some time and a lot of repetitions, just like any other skill in life. If you want to be professional, you have to be willing to spend the time. And then I think if you do all these things, you reach your goal, which would be considered success. So this kind of feels like closure on lesson 30. You know, just do the work, rinse and repeat. My next project, my next most important thing is getting my presentation prepared for the annual coaches weekend. And that's going to be on the importance of assessment. And then I'm going to go back and do a complete review of Creativity 202, lessons 1 through 30. Basically, go back and review the lessons and my own personal notes to mine that for whatever I find out of it. And the bottom note down here is, I think like any building, you have to start with the foundation at the bottom and build up from there. So if you don't have the foundation built, then the next layer doesn't mean much. And I think that's all I have for you guys today.
Before you leave that, can you pull that back up again? I just want to make a couple observations. I want to go right into coffee talk and work backwards, but while we're here. So one way to look at that is as a building and the face of a pyramid, and the importance of that stable base. Pyramid being the most stable geometric shape. And I want you to look at the trader's mindset as the prep phase. It's when everybody's showing up for work, and all of those guys that are the blue arrows, that's your work crew coming to work. Each one sort of representing, what is it for you that represents will? What is the artifact that signifies for you what will means? Courage and creativity and trust and hope. And everything north of that, the trade frame and onward, is really the application of professional norms that leads you to success. The trade frame is that's your scaffolding, and it's your sawhorse, and it's your carpenter square, and it's the little brackets you put into place, the chuck, and the templates, and all that stuff and then rules to not cut your own thumb off. And number 8, you're starting to get into endurance over time. You got to have that. If you were to add a word resilience in there, I wouldn't be offended, because you need not only 8, every kid that wants to start something new has that, they think.
Right.
But to get from 8 to 9 requires resilience and persistence and a work ethic, and to do it when you don't feel like doing it. There's a discipline that's involved in there. You might almost look at that as a series of gates that you got to go through. How do I get from the trader's mindset? How do I know that I've completed those tasks and processes and exercises so that I'm ready to start trade framing? Because you could actually do these out of order, and that wouldn't be bad. That would be bad. So I think there's something in there that says, how do I progress through this? And then if you look at that and you say, that's not really just a triangle, that's actually a pathway with flagstones going out into the vanishing point over the horizon. I don't even know what's over the edge of the horizon, but it's pointing in that direction, and I'm going through a series of iterations, and that's why time and reps leading to the land of milk and honey. So there was a lot of real power in the artifact, and then the hidden meaning that's in there. And that's one of the features of artwork, is that you draw it meaning it is in one way, and then it triggers something in somebody else, and you get to, oh, I didn't even think, and now I got more to think about my own art, or where does that art come from, that kind of stuff. So I wanted to say aho to that. I wanted to say for Joe, when you think about, with your experience with entrepreneurial businesses and all that in the early stages of a life cycle with enthusiasm, we have something that's creating the value. And then we don't even know what the world of business is like, as we're just doing things that seem that they need to be done until we survive and start getting bigger. And then we start getting compliance. The more success we have, the more often we're running into things that are actually becoming bigger and bigger challenges, that we've exploited the opportunity that was in our local space that allowed us to grow without opposition. And now as we get out there, start competing in a wider, now suddenly compliance becomes an issue to the point where, you know, the earlier rules of behavior that we have turned out to be things that didn't choke our value creation engine. But that as you inevitably get larger and larger, you start running into one-off situations that generates a rule. And then even though you may not see that circumstance again, the compliance is always there, and there's always one more extra free rider on there, one extra load that you got to take. As I was thinking about totem animals and members of the team, you know, each one sort of has a role to play and manifests its behavior in certain ways in your trading systems and in your outlook in life. Like when I was going through my life audit theater process, I was paying attention to the spirit animals that would show up, and a rattlesnake showed up, and it was in response to the badger. And so the badger is a really important animal for me. It's the central animal for me because it just minds its own business and has a den and protects that and really guards that one way in. And the only thing that he really has to worry about is a rattlesnake coming down there, because, and now it's face to face with the rattlesnake. And so the appearance of the rattlesnake for me was as a spirit animal that was warning me about, in some cases, the limits of what the other animal would be. The badger is good up except for this one spot. So, you know, at some point our strengths are strong until they become a weakness. There's an inherent nature in there. So as you're thinking about why those animals and where they come from and the roles that they play, each one of those has a strength and a weakness. It has a primary, but it also has a shadow. They help with certain kinds of problems, but not other kinds of problems. And so what is the blend, and how do I know what they're trying to tell me when they show up, and how do I leverage the strengths of both, maybe to cover for the weaknesses of the other? I mean, as I was looking at those two animals, he suggested they represented really opposite ends of a spectrum of how to approach a circumstance. One was as the single unitary embodiment of clever adaptation with all those skills and availabilities, whereas the ant by itself is nothing, but with the collective as something else. That, you know, the partnership of those two things and how they show up for you in trading, for good and for bad, or effective and less effective, I can say it neutrally, you know, are ways in which those spirit animals give us new insights into ourselves. So let me hit the aho, and then open it up for further coffee talk. We got a few minutes yet before we got to get ready for the next one. So we can open this up for free form discussion. Jeff.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you and Kuhn for helping me out on this lesson. You know, your inputs and a couple of weeks of reflection. And to me, it seems like you need to work on your identity and your purpose and your intention, get all that aligned, and get your trader's mind right. Because and then everything else is easy. You just don't even have to think about it, because, you know, a carpenter gets up every morning, puts his belt on, gets his hammer, fills his bag with nails, and he goes he hammers nails all day long, but he's not worried about hammering nails or thinking about hammering nails. He knows where each one goes. He just puts it in his place. And I think if you have the trader's mind right and everything's in alignment, then you can systematize the trade frame, the MMRB, just like we see you guys do, like you do every night. And I've noticed the 30-minute chart that I struggled with is just getting much, much easier. to where you see the frame, you see the trade, you enter it, you put your stop in, and it either works or it doesn't, so
Yeah, I think you need about 100 bars on that, is my spider sense. And the reason being it gives you about a 10-to-1 context and action. If you think about the actionable end of the snake, the last 10 bars are responsible for the RL10, the slope of the dragon, and the width of the dragon, and which then also drives the PSAR, which side you're on. And then the previous 90 bars give you enough wiggles so you can start seeing, is the amplitude getting bigger or smaller? Is it an expanding or a contracting? Is it a fan or is it a triangle or a flag or whatever? And it gives you the dimensions of how strong is that animal when it makes a move. What's it doing? So some challenges I've seen in myself is that if I don't have 100 bars on there approximately, then it starts getting a little claustrophobic. I feel like I'm trapped in a closet. I need to back out and look at it a little more. In some ways, the looking at different time frames helps, but I find about no matter what time frame, about 100 bars is about right. When I'm looking at the sniper setup, 10, 30, and 150, I actually have to expand my screen a little more to get all 150, the whole box, in there to see what's going on. But yeah, I found that backing out of that a little bit and seeing it, and then it makes it hard to see the price bars. It's because I make them a gray in color anyway and very thin. I'm not using candles, I'm just using them. So it almost disappears like fish bones. Oh. I was going to say, Jeremy, I'm pleased to hear you going after those psychology lessons too, because one of the experiences I've had as a teacher of that foundations course is that everybody wants to jump right into the boot camp, and they, why am I doing this psychology 1 and 2? I mean, what's that? Those aren't even systems. I want to see the rules. I want to get in there and get on it right away. Like 1 week into the foundations course, I tell people, hey, start with the psychology, and then in the first week, they're asking me detailed questions about the collapsing dragon pattern. And I sort of know that they probably are, reading ahead in the syllabus,
They might not have gotten through the psychology that fast.
It's yeah, or to the level that you need. It was like a flashcards or whatever. I had it. Didn't really stop to savor. But you meet people where they are. That's part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure I gave up on it for a reason. Like, sure, I came back to it for a reason. Like, yeah. And then a comment, you were talking emotions before. I'm listening to Andrew Huberman podcast. Have you guys
He's so
listened to
good.
him at all?
He's so good.
He has Lisa Feldman Barrett on this week, who's
She's great.
an emotions researcher from Northeastern. And she's talking about how scientists cannot even agree on what an emotion is.
Yeah.
Like these things that we have that we all know what they are, that drive like beyond the vast majority of all human behavior, like they can't even say what it is.
Yeah, and what the mechanism for what's the biochemical change that it is? Where is it? Where do I find it in the chemistry or the biology or in the electrical charge of neurons?
Or what's cause and what's effect, and how do you group
Well,
it
she's
together?
got another. I listened to her. She has a couple interviews with Lex Friedman on his podcast. He's an AI scientist and an MMA guy and a Russian, and his intellect is significant, but it's not the same as a Huberman interview. Sometimes I feel that when folks are on with Huberman, we're measuring credentials or something, or the size of our hands. He's so smart and big and large that Friedman really gives the interviewee a chance to really explore. And he quite often will bring in art and literature and some of that stuff in to the science side of it. And I thought her performance, her dialogue in there was just really off the chart good. And I'm not surprised she was excellent with Huberman too, but because I think she really does park you right there at the boundary of what we know and what we don't know and what we're thinking about and why it all matters and all that. It was endlessly fascinating. And
Yeah, she stopped him a couple times and said, "That's a poorly phrased question,
yeah,
and here's why that's a poorly phrased question." And like
yeah,
he's like, "Yeah, you're right." So yeah, that was amazing.
yeah. It's a special. See, you're crossing a line when you do that with Huberman. You know, say, hey, let me come at you, bro, because he takes positions, whereas Friedman comes from the perspective of an absolute noob in anything except what he does, which is some AI coding, you know, and machine learning. So he doesn't presume to take positions or push back. You know, he asks questions for enlightenment for the average. So it's a different style of podcast. But I think, yeah, if you like her job on there, it's worth listening to her with Friedman. Yeah.
Yeah, she's somebody I'll definitely follow. And then Joe, I don't know if you've ever seen Gretchen Rubin. She's a writer that talks about happiness.
Nope, but I'll write that
And she,
down.
and she has a system she calls the four tendencies, which is how people respond to internal accountability or external accountability. And so she creates a 2x2 matrix, right? Some people accept both, some people reject both, right? Some people accept one and reject the other. And if you reject external accountability and accept internal accountability, you're a questioner, which I am, and a lot of traders probably are. And then she literally describes a lot of strategies that you can use in your work, your personal life. Like if you're this person and you're relating to other people, and it's just amazingly simple, but it makes a ton of sense.
Well, thank you for that. And I might comment on something you said about skipping some of the work. One of the things Van used to say about his home study courses was that without fail, when people got to him, he would ask them, which parts of the book did you skip? And invariably, he would learn that the parts they skipped were the parts they needed the most work on. So that was sort of my cue for completeness on that side of things. So
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah, there's you know, the other way to look at that too is to say, how much work does that task demand? You know, there are certain, you know, in the world of entrepreneurial thinking, there's the thing that gives us the strategic advantage, the thing that creates the value that I want to just be absolutely world class with. And then there's other areas of hygiene where all I got to do is not be bad, and that's the appropriate level of pain to get to. Sort of the perfectionist bias could lead you to, well, I got to be the best in each and every one of those things. But if you look at it iteratively, at some point, how much is enough, and what's the point of diminishing returns? What's the sigmoid function look like that gives me my, you know, return versus time, you know, and how far should I progress in those? In the same way that a juggler looks and says, all right, what's the next thing to attend to? And let me try to be good enough with it to keep that whole thing going. But then it's very much like keeping the enterprise moving by stopping the glass balls from breaking and knowing the difference between glass balls and rubber balls. You know, there's a lot of folks that, you know, criticize benchmarking as saying, well, if your organization is committed to benchmarking best practices in all these different areas, you're always going to be second best because you're always following somebody else who's much better. Where is the unique advantage that you have? So part of that is knowing how to efficiently, you know, manage risk by being good enough, like you did with your compliance officer. Hey, instead of me becoming a lawyer and an expert in that, I hired a guy that can do that job, and that turns out to be the efficient frontier for that function. So my advice to you on Creativity 202 and the foundations course and trading in general is you're progressively digging or progressively building until it feels like enough, and then you're better off to shift before it becomes tiresome into another thing and just work in short bursts. It's not multitasking, but it's rapid transitioning at turnover points. Is how I would say that. Oh.
One quick thought here.
Yep.
In your initial objectives on the OWL project, one
Yeah.
of the things that you mentioned, Ken, was how do we maintain an edge over AI-driven trading programs that are only going to get better? And I think, this discussion really gets to the essence of that, because another word that I saw just this week in someone's materials was the word brittle, because they will tend to go towards a state of brittleness, and then they'll break, and then they'll reset and improve. And that creates a window for us, and being able to acknowledge that we are physical beings, and we are creative beings, and we are intuitive beings. We're not one all the way. People who say we're just a pile of energy and gas, well, don't tell that to the Bullet or the Mack truck, because it'll take us out in a minute. But if we have the intuition to jump out of the way and the skill sets to do that, then we really have something. So that's what I very much appreciate about this discussion.
Yeah, certainly the cyborg stance, the cyborg point of view, the best of AI and the best of the human. If you think of the AI as the inside of the black box, and all you can see is the trading signals that it takes, you can't tell from the outside if the algorithm that's in there cranking away was an AI generated or a human generated or a random noise generator. You can begin to infer what the internal composition is by the characteristics of a large data set of results and backwards engineer what it might be. But at some point, it doesn't actually matter what the source of the rule set was. What's more important is the rate of change of the rule set. So if I'm a person that had luck for 1 week in the market and then never changed for 30 years, I'd quickly become obsolete. And it's because, well, the rules work once and then never change. Well, when neural nets first came along, it was computationally costly to train a neural net to handle certain trading circumstances. And then once guys built those models, that it was kind of stuck in the model that it had. And so as I was putting together a family of models, and my thinking on that was what I wanted in a neural net, and I would say the same thing with an AI regenerative, is every night to update the entire model with the new set of data that I had from today, and then rerun the whole model. So how fast could I run it? And I remember in the 90s in Europe that we had an automated repair parts supply system, and it had an algorithm that would look at all of the demand data and then recalculate what your stockage objectives should be and process all the status and send it out to you so you knew where in the system your requisition was. But it used to take 28 hours to run the process for a 24-hour period. And so after 5 days, actually on the 6th day, you actually could not run any parts on Sundays because you needed Sunday to catch up for the last, because you lost 4 hours each day. So after 6 days, you were a full day behind, and you needed the 7th day of rest in order to reset back to zero on Monday morning. So that's the case where the cost of adaptation was greater than the value of recap. So how long do I let my rules go? Well, until they drift out of tolerance, and then I start to rerun it, really? Or do you start testing adaptations constantly like DNA does, and just have a very low cost of testing and a very rapid scaling and reward mechanism for success? So the DNA model of ignorant but massively replicative selection turns out to be the most powerful evolutionary form. So genetic algorithms. But again, the same thing. If I use a genetic algorithm to come up with a trading system, which is in, there's a guy that has a system generator using genetic algorithms. You plant some seeds with your favorite indicators, and it does genetic algorithm and then back tests it. Mike Bryant has a system that does that. If you're not rerunning those things, you're going to get evolutionary drift. You're going to be drifting away from a world that is adapting away from you. So it turns out that the story thinking that I was describing earlier, the one that is very speculative and keeps things fresh, keeps the stew cooking. You're always ready to expand or contract when unexpected company shows up. You can add more water to the soup or add another onion or whatever. So it's the rate, it is the second derivative. It's the rate of change of adaptation. You want to learn as fast, but not faster than the market changes. You want to somehow be tuned to the pace of market change, which leads me to the studies of volatility and the volatility of volatility. That second derivative of volatility turns out to be the essential feature, which is what we get in the sniper system, where we're taking a look at the statistics of the change of volatility over time to create those critical states. That to me is the persistent, and the more AI there is, the easier it is for guys to come up with wacky ideas. The more volatility there will be, and the better I like it, because I seek volatility. I'm not looking to stabilize and create a closed system. I want an open, adaptive system. So that's I think that's a natural resting point for us. I got to start the next one up here in about 3 minutes. So I'm going to close this one out so it'll start processing. I'll get this posted in the creativity folder under the check-ins for lesson 3. And always good to see you guys. Well done. Really good work tonight. Keep up the great work, and see you soon.
Cheers.